All right, everybody, let's begin Unit 2, Day 5 on estimating square roots. And the disclaimer at the beginning of this video is that we are working on an estimation strategy. We are not working on a calculation strategy. There are ways to do square roots and calculate those using paper and pencil or markers. However, we are going to estimate only. If you're a purist and you really want to see how to calculate a square root by hand, feel free to look that up. That is not what this video is. We are going to get close to the value of a square root. We're going to estimate the square root, and for our purposes, this will be sufficient. So with that said, the first thing that's important to note is that if you're going to estimate square roots, you must know your perfect squares. Now, we've been studying the first 15 perfect squares. Of course, there's more of them. However, we're going to stick with our list of perfect squares because it's a whole lot easier to memorize this than to write a 225-point number line every time we want to do this task. And with that said, let me explain why. So we may come back to this list again, but for now, let's move this out of the way. And we're going to try to accomplish two different tasks today. We're going to try to estimate the square root of 40, and then we're going to do a second example in just a moment. Let's start by doing the estimate of the square root of 40. Now, the idea behind the estimate of square root of 40 is, and here we go, back to this sheet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to identify where the number 40 is on this list. And let me explain what I mean. If I take a look at the number 36 here, and I take the square root of 36, I know that this equals 6. And the very next number in line is 49. I know that the square root of 49 is 7, which tells me that if I'm looking for the square root of 40, which is in between there, then my answer is in between 6 and 7. You could even look and see that it's only a few spaces away from 36, but it's more spaces away from 49. So you might even be able to say with confidence that the square root of 40 is between 6 and 7, but closer to the number 6. So I'm thinking it's 6.1 or 6.2 or 6.3 or 6.4. Something in there, and I'm not really immediately sure what it is, but it's going to be something, and ideally we want to figure that out. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and figure out how to do this technique. So I've created a list of the numbers that show up between the 36 and the 49, identifying that the square root of 36 is equal to 6 and the square root of 49 is equal to 7. This would be something that you could put on a piece of paper if you needed to, although I'm going to suggest that you don't really need to do this because if you know your perfect squares and you've memorized that 36 and 49 are, and the term I'm going to use will be bookends, all right, bookends. This is not a math term, it's just my term. So the 36 and the 49 are bookends, meaning our number is in between them. Then between the 6 and the 7, we simply need to figure out where the 40 lies and approximately what number it stands for. Now, we already said from the previous page that we know it's going to be 6 point something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the 6 right off the bat. And instead of a decimal, I'm going to make a fraction. And here's what I'm going to do with the fraction. Within the fraction, I need to do a numerator and a denominator. Now, this is going to be very simple. I'm going to go ahead and subtract the maximum perfect square and the minimum perfect square, 49 minus 36, and that's going to identify how many spaces we have in between each of these numbers. That is my denominator. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my actual number, the 40, and I'm going to subtract, again, the smaller perfect square. And that number right there is my numerator. And now all that's left is 6 and 4/13 is to do long division. And that's not what this video is about, but long division, the 4 would go, inside, let's see, 6 and 4/13. I'm not going to finish this problem, but 6 and 4/13 would become, let's see, 4 goes on the inside and 13 goes on the outside, and you add your decimal and you add your zeros, and whatever you get here is going to be the 6 point whatever you get, right? So if you get 3 place values, you're going to get 3 place values, and that would be how you would solve this problem. Finding a video that teaches you how to do long division is not difficult to find online. So that is not our goal. Our goal is let's get it to a mixed number, then you go ahead and calculate the long division, and then you will have your answer. And once again, this is an estimate. This is not going to be exactly the same as what you would find online. what you would find with a calculator, but it is an estimate. Let's look at a second example and finish the video. If I want to estimate a completely different number, estimate the square root of 200. Once again, I'm going to pull up my used list already. And 200 is between 196 and 225. So I'm going to kind of squeeze it in here, right? Last time I used blue, so let's go ahead and use blue again. Now, I know that the square root of 196 is 14, and I know that the square root of 225 is 15. So the square root of 200 is between 14 and 15, and again, we could argue that it's closer to 14 than it is to 15. So it's going to be 14 point something, probably 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3 because it's pretty close to that number 196. So let's go ahead and figure this out with more precision, right? Here is that list of numbers written out again. But once again, I'm going to go ahead and say that you don't really need the list of numbers because if you know that the perfect square that's larger than 200 is 225 and the perfect square that's below 200 is 196, you simply need to subtract those. 225 minus 196, that's 29, and that is our denominator. Now we're going to subtract the number itself, just like I did up here, from the smaller number one more time. Notice how I'm using the same thing. They're all nice and lined up. This is a 4. And our answer, slid down here, is going to be 14 and 4/29. And then once again, the 4 tips over, the 29 goes on the outside, you add your decimal, and you add some zeros, and presumably you're going to go ahead and get your 3 numbers here, and then you're going to have 14 point whatever it is that you come out with. There's no real reason to go to lots of decimals here because it's an estimate anyway, so normally we'd probably do 2 decimal places and use the second one in the hundredths place to round the first one up. And that should get you to within about 1 decimal for any square root, especially those that we're studying between 1 and 225.